Welcome to the UIAAA Connection podcast. The UIAAA would not be able to broadcast this podcast without the support of our business partners. Thank you to all of the gold and silver business partners of the UIAAA, BSN Sports, and our contact, Jeremy Macy. Final Forms, AMP, with contacts Julie Renner and Clay Burnett. Granite Canyon Wealth, and our contact, Megan Palazzo. Jostens, and our contact, Molly Shaheen. NCSA, Next College Student Athlete, and our contact, Paul Putnam. VNN Varsity News Network, and our contact, Jason Jones. Thanks again to all of the gold and silver UIAAA business partners.
Welcome, my friends, to the inaugural episode of the UIAAA Connection. We are pleased to have for our first guest on the UIAAA podcast, Dr. Lee Green, who now resides in South Padre Island in Texas. And of course, he's been to the UIAAA conference numerous times. Welcome, Lee.
It's a pleasure and an honor to be here, Mark.
All right. And we were talking just before we started the recording here. Tell us a little bit about where you live now. I know it's different from Baker University in Kansas. I know it's South Padre Island. Just give us a quick rundown of where you're now living.
You bet. I lived in Kansas City my entire life, but South Padre is a barrier island that's located just off the coast of Texas in the Gulf of Mexico. And I'm down. South Padre Island is the very southeasternmost point of the state of Texas. And the island itself is a long, skinny barrier island that runs all the way from North Padre Island up by Corpus Christi down here to South Padre Island. And you can't drive all the way from north to south on the island itself. The Gulf cuts through several places. But down here, South Padre, it's only about the bottom 5 miles of the island that's developed. And I love it because it's never become one of those crazy touristy type places. It's the year-round population's only about 5,000, and it's busy in the summer with lots of families that vacation here. And then from mid-November to mid-March, a lot of winter Texans that come down from the upper Midwest to get away from the cold for wintertime.
And snowbirds, okay.
Exactly, all the snowbirds. And aren't nearly as many of them this year as there have been in previous years because of the pandemic.
Sure.
But it's a great place to live.
All right, well, let's go back. I know you and I go way back, Lee, but for our listeners that may not have had a chance to meet you, just any quick stories from growing up or when you went to college or maybe your first job that would interest them?
Well, I grew up in Kansas City, lived on the Missouri side of the state line till middle school, and then we moved over to the Kansas side of the state line. And it was my mom, dad, myself, my younger sister, Lynn, 2 years younger, and then my brother, Lane, 5 years younger, who is himself an athletic director. And I think a lot of the members in the UIAAA know Lane.
Oh, you mean Lane, the more famous of the Green brothers?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. And so were you involved in sports as a youth?
Well, my involvement in sports, I played youth sports, but has always been more academic than participatory just because of my lack of athletic ability. I've been in awe over the years being involved with all these AD associations of people like yourself, great athletes growing up and all that type of stuff. But I really got interested. Of course, I was interested in sports as a kid, but when I was in law school at the University of Kansas, and we had 3 faculty members who taught courses in sports law. And that was where my kind of academic interest in sports, intersected with law, really first developed. And one faculty member who taught courses in legal issues to do with pro sports, and then another who taught legal issues to do with kind of labor law in sports. He was actually an arbitrator for Major League Baseball. And then a third, a guy named Steve Fair, who was an agent who represented exclusively baseball players. And he had a little bit of a leg up in the business because his older brother, Donald, was for a couple of decades the executive director of the Major League Baseball Players Association.
I recognize the last name. Okay.
FEHR. And so those courses in law school really got me interested, but my interest took me in a little different direction, because what I really got interested in wasn't so much the pro sports stuff, but the legal issues that impact college and high school athletic programs. And as luck of geography would have it, at the time, law school, and then after I started teaching at Baker and needed an area to do research and writing and all that publish or perish stuff with a career in academia, back at that time, the NCAA, the NIAAA, and the National Federation, along with the NIAAA, were all headquartered in Kansas City.
Kansas City.
Yeah, and so it was really the NCAA and the National Federation / NIAAA that really helped me out a lot with all the research that I was doing on those legal issues that impact the college and high school athletic programs.
So was it before? I assume it was before Frank Kovaleski was with the NIAAA. So you had contacted the Federation or the NIAAA or both with your after you graduated, I assume.
Well, while I was still in law school, I was doing a research project that focused in on just liability for sports injuries, and the NIAAA and NFHS really helped me out a lot. The people that worked there and the attorneys that represented them at the time. This was even before John Black was involved, with the Federation. But they helped me out a lot. But then one of the very first people I met there was Frank Kovaleski. And he was in the process of sort of imagining a professional development program for the NIAAA. And so he felt like sports law was an area that would need to be covered in such a professional development program.
So so early 90s, or was it earlier, even into the 80s when you first met?
This was late 80s, early 90s, after I had started teaching at Baker, and that I was really getting serious about doing all this research, and had come to realize that, at first I was kind of focused on college athletic department issues, but that the issues that impact high school athletic programs are it's an extensive array of issues that high school athletic administrators have to be on top of. And so it was a very natural partnership, and I really enjoyed it. I was sad to see the, NIAAA move along with the NFHS when the NCAA moved to Indianapolis in the year 2000. But Indy's been a fun place to visit over the last 20 years also.
So let me ask you this. So, and this is right about the time I was first involved with the NIAAA. If memory serves me right, the first course was 501, and it was 8 hours in 1996. So so I assumed that the legal part of that came from you, and then of course it quickly grew into, I think, by 98, I think there was 6 courses in Vegas, and then of course started snowballing from there.
It's amazing the growth of the professional development program, because it was in the, I think, late 80s, early 90s at one of the national conferences that I attended that I did the legal part of 501. But they quickly realized that 8 hours was going to be a little too much.
Yeah.
And, the lead instructor for that class was the one-of-a-kind Dr. John Olson.
Oh.
But, he really put the pedal to the metal in that class.
It was 8 hours, so it probably had 16 hours worth of content. He was just going 100 miles an hour.
It was mind-boggling. But then, after the mid-90s, when they really kind of formalized the program, that 504 became the very first of the sports law
The
courses.
legal courses.
But we tried to, in that original 504, cover all of the topics
Right.
that would impact high school ADs. And that was way too much. If you're trying to cover, liability for sports injuries and constitutional rights of student athletes and Title IX and gender equity issues and, hazing and sexual harassment and disabilities, it was just way too much. And that led to the development of the other LTC legal courses.
Okay, since we're on that topic now, let's just talk for a moment about the current 504. So it has obviously the legal duties, but is there anything else in there besides the extensive look at that?
That's really because there are, courts and legislatures have defined so many duties that athletic administrators and high school athletic programs owe to student athletes that really it takes the whole 4 hours just to cover all of those duties. And we have it kind of arbitrarily divided into 14 categories of duties, but really those encompass probably 70 to 80 very specific duties. And so what we do is go through those duties and use court cases that have dealt with the alleged violation or failure to fulfill those duties by athletic administrators. Now, it's kind of a tough course as the first one for especially young ADs to take, because they look at that, all those duties, and their immediate reaction is, well, there's no way I can fulfill all these duties. Time to just go ahead and type up a letter of resignation. And but we try to allay those fears and make it clear to them that your courts don't require you to be the 100% absolute guarantor of the safety of student athletes. You just have to exercise reasonable care. And we now have over 100 court cases included in the manual for that course that illustrate that point. They kind of define with regard to each of the duties, things like supervision, proper technique instruction, safe playing environment, protective equipment, on and on and on. What constitutes reasonable care? That's a pretty vague phrase. Sure. So the whole 4 hours really of 504 is exploring all of those duties, but they continue to change. I mean, even this year, all the issues with what if someone contracts COVID-19 through their participation in the athletic program, or a fan, or a coach, what exactly is involved there. So it's a moving target that we're trying to cover.
All right, let's briefly go then to 506 as it's currently constituted. So the main points in 506, and if you remember, tell us when this course split off from the 504.
It was about 5 years after we had created 504. So it was late 90s, early 2000s when it really got launched full scale. And it really has become the kind of gender discrimination course, because it deals with Title IX in two different contexts. One, Title IX as it applies to inequities between girls and boys sports programs. And then the second is Title IX as it applies to sexual harassment and sexual assault within athletic programs. And that also is a constantly evolving topic because the U.S. Office for Civil Rights, which is the agency charged with enforcing Title IX, is constantly sort of changing its interpretation of what it takes for girls' programs to be on equal footing with boys' programs, and then also constantly changing the regulation of sexual harassment in athletic programs. And in fact, it was just in 2020 that the Department of Education, through the Office for Civil Rights, launched a whole new set of regulations over sexual harassment in educational institutions and athletic programs. And to we try to cover all that in a very consolidated way in 506. But to give you an idea of the challenge, those new regulations are a little over 2,000 pages long. So to take that and boil it down to where, in an hour or so, we can cover the key points that ADs need to be on top of. It's quite a challenge, but it's also really useful to the ADs, I think.
All right, and a related question to that, and I know, I believe that this is fact because I've heard so many times, but I've heard over the years so many times that anyone who is a CAA or above from the NIAAA has never been in a court case that they have lost because of the certification. We know, is that actually true according to your research?
Sadly, it is true, but partly that's a byproduct of it. Just in our litigious society nowadays, whenever you have somebody who sues a school district and an athletic program, they tend to name everyone in the potential chain of vicarious liability. And that, of course, includes, an athletic director, head coach, assistant coaches, athletic trainers. So a lot of people are named as defendants who end up getting dropped from these suits, but that doesn't make it any less stressful for the people who are named as defendants just to be served with process that you're involved in a lawsuit. It's kind of a scary deal. But yeah, it would be rare for someone to go through an entire career as an athletic administrator. In fact, virtually impossible, and not be named as a defendant a few times in these cases.
All right, well then let's logically move on to, I assume it was 5 or 6 years later than when we split the 508 off of the 4 and 6. Oh, I've lost your sound, Lee.
Got me
okay,
now?
You're back. Okay, yeah.
All right, good. Yep. I've got my microphone right here, and I bumped the USB port. But the 508, there's always topics that become more specialized and therefore need more coverage. And one of the kind of offshoots of harassment in athletic programs is hazing. And so 508, the very first module in there is a hazing module. And then that topic of the constitutional rights of student athletes. Whenever an athletic program wants to sanction an athlete, suspend them temporarily or dismiss them from a team for some violation of a student athlete code of conduct, they have to be very careful not to violate the constitutional rights of the student athletes. If it was an inappropriate posting on social media, there may be a free speech issue. If it was the athlete's attendance at a party where alcohol was served, it may be a First Amendment freedom of assembly issue. If it's just a fairness and a chance to be heard, maybe a due process issue. But there's a whole array of constitutional rights that student athletes have that ADs need to be on top of just to be proactive and save themselves the trouble of having the punishment they dole out overturned in court. So hazing, constitutional law, and then some topics like disabilities law applied to athletic programs. Kids with motor skill impairments or learning disabilities, that's also covered in 508. And then a very specialized issue, but that hits athletic programs pretty hard, and that is all those people that help out with your athletic program, your ticket sellers, ticket takers, event supervisors, the minimum wage and overtime issues under the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act. And I doubt there's very many athletic directors out there who, when they took the job, thought, I'm going to need to know something about the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act, but actually you do. So we try to cover that, just a working knowledge of it in 508. And then a few years after 508, the most recent of the course is 510.
Okay, let me just interrupt you for a second, if I could.
Sure.
Ask a follow-up question related to the 508, and this goes back probably it's got to be 8 or 9 years ago, because I was still working and I retired in 2013. But you may remember we had a hazing incident here at the school where I was working at in Sandy. And I was on the phone to you 5 minutes after the TV station came into my office, and I kicked them out and told them there'd be no story. Just reiterating and going over the points that we needed to take, making sure we did the proper investigation. Sadly, and I forwarded that to the principal, and the principal forwarded it to the district office, but the district office, as so many times, they've been there for so long, they think that, how do I say this properly? I guess what I'm saying is they think that they're better equipped to handle this hazing thing just because they're in the district office. And I do remember that it was not handled properly. There was lawsuits, this and that. And I'm not saying, oh, look at me, what I did. My point is, I called you because we had that relationship, and I laid out a path that I wanted to take. I reaffirmed it with you. Had the district done that, I'm thinking it would have been a much better outcome. So I guess it's just a no extra plus for 508. But comment if you remember the conversation we had.
Oh, yeah. I remember exactly you asking me sort of what your approach should be in terms of investigating and handling the situation. And I really didn't have a whole lot to tell you because you remembered all the points that had been covered in 508 and the hazing. I think I had done standalone hazing workshops at the UIAAA conference.
Yes.
That you had attended. And you were handling everything by the book. And I think your district office came to realize that, as the situation, progressed. But that illustrates another point too. I don't think there's very many people outside of the profession of being an athletic director who really understand everything that's involved in being an AD. And they don't realize the knowledge that ADs through professional development come to possess. And a lot of times that may be outside, student athletes, parents, community members, but sometimes it's even members of your own district that they think you're just the old football coach, and they don't realize the level of knowledge that you've acquired.
Yes. No, and that was exactly my point before I interrupted. So thanks for that clarification. I just think that's an interesting story for our listeners if they're faced with that. But let's now quickly get to 510 before I have you on too long.
Yeah. Well, no, 510, it basically was new topics that were emerging, and we kept getting, inquiries in the evaluations from the other legal classes about, well, what are the legal issues involved in handling pregnant or parenting student athletes? What are the legal issues that are involved in the transgender kids that want to participate in our athletic programs? What are the legal issues we need to watch out for with regard to copyright and trademark law? So we'd always get these requests, and they kind of piled up. So 510 is sort of a potpourri of those exact topics: transgender participation, pregnant and parenting student athletes, copyright law, event security, and then a little module that starts off that course that focuses very specifically on social media, something that, of course, over the last decade's become huge. So, and I'm sure it's funny because I remember back 20, 25 years ago, I thought, I'm going to run out of topics to talk about in these sports law seminars. And little did I know that there was always going to be new stuff coming down the pike. And so in a few years, we'll probably need another legal class.
Which was my next question. Do you foresee, at least in the next probably 5 years, a 512?
Maybe like 5 years out, give time for, the new issues to emerge that we haven't even thought about yet. Right now, we're doing a pretty good job in the 4 legal issues classes of covering all the key stuff ADs need. Plus, we have to keep in mind it creates a challenge I mean, the whole professional development program, it's just absolutely amazing the way it grew from those handful of courses that you referred to in the late 90s to what is it, nearly 50 courses now.
I think it's probably over 50 with the international courses.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
And so scheduling all those for to be offered at different state AD conferences and then at the national conference is becoming quite a challenge, because historically there's always been 4 time slots for the leadership training classes. And year before last at National Harbor in Maryland, we actually offered a couple classes on Friday night, a 5th time slot, just to see if that would work. And those drew like 100 people per class. So
I think that's probably, of course, this year's conference was so different because it was virtual, but I would bet that that's probably going to expand. I can't speak for the NIAAA and for Phil and for Mike, but that would be my guess. I'll put a plug in here now, at least for our Utah listeners and anybody from the surrounding states that wants to come. We are going to teach the 508 and the 510 in St. George the 14th and 15th of April this year. Of course, you'll be coming unless we get COVID part, whatever, because I'm assuming by that time, all of our educators are going to be vaccinated. People like me, the over 65 group, will be vaccinated. I'm hoping that it comes up because, at least to my next question, what's your earliest recollection of the UIAAA? I know we spoke a little bit about when you first came. But.
Well, it really is, kind of around the turn of the millennium when I first started coming to your conference. And my earliest recollections are just of all the incredibly nice and devoted, in terms of being professionals, ADs that I met. And I mean, I'm talking people like yourself and Rich Barton and Dan Cowan and Craig Gladwell and Kendra Tomsick and Duron Dolphin, and I could go on and on. I think the very first person that I got to know well at the UIAAA was one year in the late 90s when it was offered in San Diego. And I had a free afternoon. I went on one of those Old Town trolley tours, and I happened to be sitting right next to Bud Campbell.
Oh.
And boy, what a great guy. I miss him so much. I think of him every time I come to the UIAAA, and I had no idea who he was at the time. But what a great man. And so that's really my recollection. And then the conference itself, just how well organized it is. The way it's always the LTC classes combined with the different other events that go along with it, and the trade show, and you all have always just done. I attend a lot of state AD conferences, and I see some where they kind of are flying by the seat of their pants. It's not so well organized, but yours is always well organized, and I attribute a lot of that to the hard work of your wife, who seems to keep things running.
That's absolutely true. Without Deb, we would be in trouble. That's kind of you to say, but not in our defense. But of course, there's a lot of help. It's not just me. We have so many people behind the scenes. Plus, we really, when we moved to the multi-day conference and moved it out of Salt Lake City, we really just borrowed the NIAAA model. A quick story that is before your time with us, but the last fall conference we had was in '96, right around Halloween. And then when I became the president, I told the board at the time, I said, look, we need to go to a multi-day conference. We need to do it like the NIAAA. We need to move it to St. George. We can do all these things. And they just kind of laughed and said, yeah, okay, that's a great idea. You go ahead and take care of that. And so that first conference was just such a scary thing to move to St. George. So it was basically the fall of '97. We should have had our next conference. It was the spring of '98. And then I think the first time we had you there, probably the second time we offered courses was 2001. I know the first year we had 501. And then I think we started bringing you, and I think you've been there every year except for two, including last year. I think one year you were Europe abroad with Baker. But as you know, and I want to share with our Utah listeners, we teach 504 and 506 one year now, and then we teach 508 and 510 the other. So within a 2-year time span, you could take all the legal courses if you're not able to attend the national conference. So we think that that's important for our Utah ADs. So
that's another thing I've always really been impressed with your conference is it kind of demonstrates the commitment of the ADs in Utah to professional development. Because I'll go to some conferences and the enrollment in my legal classes, there'll only be 5 or 6 people. But it seems like at the UIAAA, there's always 20 to 25 in those legal classes. And they'll take 504 and 506 one year and then pick up the other 2 the next year. And I think part of it is you have an awful lot of ADs who are committed to getting their certification as CAAs or CMAAs. And that's also a great motivator for them to take the legal classes, because 504 and 506 being required for the CAA and then the other 2 for the CMAA. Good carrot on the end of the stick.
Absolutely. So tell me what you think of when you first started getting involved. So this goes back 30 years now, because you were involved before I was with the NIAAA in the early 90s. So how's the job of an athletic administrator different today than it was back then? I know that's kind of a broad question.
No, I think it's changed. I think the modern day high school athletic director has to be more of a professional than ever, because they're dealing with such a wide range of issues that I'm not sure if, back in the 60s, 70s, early 80s, that ADs had to deal with quite the range of things they have to deal with now. But it's just mind-boggling to me to look at ADs. And of course, a lot of this I've learned through watching my younger brother, who was a building AD for a dozen years and district AD for many years. But yeah, I mean, there's the human resources management aspect of the job, the facilities management aspect, event management, turf management, all the legal stuff, of course, and the range of constituents that ADs have to deal with. I look at the modern day AD as being kind of at the hub of the wheel, and the spokes that run out to the rim of the wheel connect that administrator with all of the constituents that have an interest in the high school program. And of course, that's student athletes and parents and teachers at the school and district level administrators, the media, so many outside members of the community, on and on and on. It's a communications job too, to a large extent. And it's definitely not one of those jobs that it's just like, I think a lot of people outside the profession think that the AD is just the football coach who's given a little extra set of duties to schedule a few events. And they have no idea of, at a high school with, 8 or 9 sports for boys, 8 or 9 for girls. And those are offered at the varsity, JV, sophomore, and freshman level. So the school may have 70 something teams, each of which has a head coach, many teams, assistant coaches. The range of issues that ADs have to deal with in managing, I look at ADs as the equivalent of the CEO of a pretty sizable enterprise. And I think that's really what the modern AD is.
Well, and that's a great comment, Lee. And if I could just package that last statement and send it to every district in Utah across the United States to let those superintendents understand that, I think it would make a huge difference in the way our programs are run. Tell me quickly here before we leave, what's the favorite part of your job? And that would be back when you were with Baker, and of course your involvement with states.
Yeah, of course I taught for 30 years. And so, the working with the students, the being a college professor is a great life. Those kids 18 to 22 years old, so enthusiastic, and just the level of energy in class and around a campus. That was always my favorite part. Part of it too is that teaching at the college level is really a job that focuses on learning. You spend your days reading, researching, writing, and I'm an unabashed nerd. I love learning. So that was always one of my favorite parts of the job. And thoroughly enjoyed it.
Okay, quickly before we leave, if there was something you could share with your wealth of knowledge to, let's say, a brand new athletic administrator, one that's been 2 or 3 years, just I know there's so many things. If you could pick 2 things that you could share that would help them, or at least stop them from slitting their wrists and turning the resignation after they take the 504.
Well, the first couple of years on the job is so overwhelming that I would encourage every athletic administrator to find a mentor, to find somebody that, an experienced AD that you can go to with your questions, that you could, get together with, once a month for breakfast and just get their general input. But the networking aspect, and this is where being a member of the UIAAA, attending the conference can be so useful, because you meet all those potential mentors through your state ADs association. So find a mentor and network with that individual. And then the second recommendation would be to really commit yourself to professional development and to attend the state conference and the national conference. And I know that's a challenge financially for a lot of ADs at a lot of schools, but one great thing is the Leadership Training Institute, the professional development vehicle nationwide, is now offering so many classes online that you can take. Now, that's not quite as good as actually attending a conference where you get to sit next to those potential mentors and get direct face-to-face input. You don't want your entire professional development life to be a Zoom conference.
Exactly.
But yeah, I would, find a mentor and commit yourself to professional development. And that will, if nothing else, you'll at least have people you can commiserate with on the different issues that come up.
Absolutely. So I'm going to steal this phrase from Dan Rather. Is there any question that I didn't ask you that I should have asked you?
Boy, you've done a great job of kind of covering a little bit of everything, and that's trying to think if there's anything else. I guess, try to, if possible, if you're an AD, have a brother who's involved in athletic administration from whom you can learn, because I've certainly learned a lot from my brother Lane about the realities of being an AD. And that, I think, helps me out, because if I was just presenting these sports law seminars just purely from a legal standpoint, not really understanding what you all go through on the front lines, I don't think I would be very effective. So, choose your brother carefully.
Great, thank you.
Or sister.
And I'm going to throw in a quick, just when you talk about networking with new ADs, it's so, at least for me, now I know it's a personal story with you and me, and of course, Rich Bouchard and your brother Lane. And of course, the text we share every time the Jayhawks are playing, or maybe the Utes are playing. This is something that when you first become an athletic administrator, that you don't realize that you've got these relationships that can develop through your state and throughout the nation. It's such a, at least for me, it's such a fun thing to have these little relationships on the side.
I totally agree that I have a lot of fun just with you and Rich Bouchard, my brother, every time University of Utah or KU is playing, texting back and forth. So, yeah, you really do develop some, it sounds cliche to say this, but some, lifelong friendships through this networking also.
Absolutely. Well, I think that wraps us up for us, Lee. I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us. And I know all the people in the UIAAA and hopefully nationally get a chance to hear this, but I'll sign off for this week for the UIAAA Connection. And thanks, Lee, and we'll see you again next week.